Here we are. So welcome everyone, whether you're watching this live or in our spaces here in Decentral House or remotely after the fact. I believe we'll be posting this on YouTube afterwards and then maybe in other mediums. But this is masterclass number 9 in our Busy Entrepreneurs education program. The idea behind this program was really to help entrepreneurs who typically like to just get started on things. And in fact, the mark of a good entrepreneur is often that ability to go from idea to starting faster than a normal person. And we thought that we would put together some classes that would give them the foundations in short segments, one class a week, available at 2 different times, in order to get that foundation kind of on the go. If you haven't seen our previous lessons, we spent 1 week going over some legal foundations, which were focused towards the crypto community, but also applicable no matter what type of business you're looking at. And we also did a series of 4 webinars on marketing. So if you're not a marketer, but you're trying to run a business, and if you're trying to run a business, then you need sales and marketing. Do take a look at those, as they may be very valuable to you. But now that we've gotten kind of the legal stuff out of the way that can really prevent you from running your business, and the marketing stuff out of the way, which can prevent you from being able to sell the things within your business, to communicate the amazing things that you're doing, we decided to get down to this really important core topic, which I think often gets overlooked, especially by first-time founders, and especially by first-time founders who have enterprise experience, so big business experience. Because running a startup is fundamentally different from a large business, and we'll get into that. If at any point during the class you have a question, please do stop me. Just put your hand up and I will see it. Happy to make this a discussion, because I think really this is about preventing people from going through unnecessary pain. And we'll get into that in a moment. So what makes a great startup work? I think there are a number of different things, and the feeling out there, especially with people who have a big business background, is that running a startup is a free-for-all. But it's not. It's actually another form of management. And as we go through this, we're going to be talking about some of the hard facts that have to do with running a startup. They are different rules than big businesses. I think I do a lot of interviews for hiring people, and we make sure that they're ready for the adventure that is working in a startup. And the first thing that usually gets brought up with people who've worked in at least one startup is that your job description becomes almost meaningless in a startup environment, in that everyone is trying to work towards this big, complicated goal, and everyone is doing whatever they can in order to support that. But what we're going to go over during this particular lesson is really from a founding team's perspective. So we're going to start with what are the attributes of a great founding team, a founding team that is going to get through the pain and process of being in a startup with the least amount of conflict and challenges possible. We are going to go into the need to know your client. I know, again, many of you that are launching to a startup probably have seen a persona or an ideal customer profile before, or maybe you've heard of those things. Maybe you've gotten that in an MBA. But the reality of startup life requires a little bit of a different approach to that. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about hard value, in a sense that most people who launch startups are doing so because there's something that they feel is missing in the world. And it's down to that whole be the change you want to see. But it's really important that at the end of the day, you realize that the market will actually dictate if you get to do that thing. And finding a way to channel your passion into something that other people who are not you and don't have that passion will pay for, or finding people who have the same passion is going to be really important to your success as an entrepreneur. We're going to look at why is the way you're doing it special. In the broadest sense, this is a brand question because your brand is ultimately a promise that you make to people about how you're going to do things and how you're going to deliver things, full of kind of implied and explicit promises that are made to your buyers. And the thing that I always tell people that sometimes shocks them is that if you are starting a startup that is doing the same thing that someone else is already doing, then you're actually destroying value. And we'll get into that. We'll talk about tokens and Web3 stuff. I think particularly in the tech sector, in the service sector sometimes, and in kind of emerging disciplines and businesses, a lot of founders will fall into the trap of talking about the back end or the methods that make their project neat. And I think one of the things that I've learned as a professional and also as a writer is that you have to earn the attention of your audiences. So we'll get into that. We'll talk about building a moat. And then finally, we'll talk about execution. Because if I can give you one takeaway for this entire lesson, is that all the things that I am going to talk about during this class are going to make your life easier. They're going to spare you pain. If you want to be a startup, they're going to allow you to give better feedback to a friend or a family member who is running a startup. They're going to be broadly applicable to any time you do something new for which you expect to get paid. But if you can make it work by breaking every single one of these rules, then you become a rule in of yourself. I'm not encouraging that because I really do think that you will increase the amount of cost that you have to incur in order to do it. You will increase the suffering that you personally will go through and maybe even your team members and your family. But always remember that if what you are doing is not working, it doesn't matter how well you're following whatever rules you're following. And if what you're doing is working, then there's something there that needs to be reinforced. If you build it, they will come. This is a quote from a movie called Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner, and I'm dating myself by even bringing it up. And in that movie, a man who has a farm and is very nostalgic about baseball believes that if he builds a field, the ghost of past baseball players, including some that have been wronged in the past, will come back and play a final game. It's actually, if you look at it from an entrepreneur or a startup's perspective, it's one of the scariest movies you could ever see, even though it's quite uplifting. And it's scary because in the movie, a person does work that they don't have a valid reason to believe should be done, and an audience kind of forms without any particular reason behind it other than belief that it should happen. And somehow all of these things kind of work together. The movie was an immensely popular hit. And actually, the movie set is not only something that people go visit as a tourist attraction, but they've built a real baseball stadium next to it, so that it's really kind of possessed the imagination of all the people doing it, and that's because humans love myths. Myths are very easily understandable. They're simplified. They teach this idea, which is true, which is that in order to create something valuable, sometimes you just need to do it. But what they discount, and sometimes this is even perpetuated by entrepreneurs when they talk about it, is this idea of just getting going and so on and so forth. But it completely throws away all the experience and knowledge and exposure that happens before that. Founders usually draw their inspiration for really big ideas because they have worked in that business because they've experienced that pain, and the thing that they're trying to solve represents a frustration that they have personally felt or that they have seen in others. And so, yes, from that sometimes emotional urge or that passion, they go ahead and build it. But it is validated by their own experience and their own contacts and their networks. And for every founder who has managed to succeed by winging it, there are probably 100 who have wound up with an invention that everyone kind of talks about, and they were real enthusiasts and they lost some money on it, or it never went anywhere. And there are probably 1,000 who didn't do anything, who maybe should have. But I just want to make sure that this is kind of clear, that if you think you can start a startup and just wing it, and it's automatically going to work, unless you're very lucky, or you're very rich and you can just keep pumping money into something until it succeeds, or you can pay for people who know what they're doing, it's probably not going to work. It's going to end badly. The statistics for startups are that 50% of them fail within the first 5 years. That's not even counting the startups that never make it off the ground, the people who go to friends and family to get that initial funding and never get it, or who never quit their jobs, or who never actually incorporate their businesses. And then at 14 years, 90% of startups have dropped out of the race. And these are businesses that go bankrupt, right? That cease to exist. That's not even counting the number of startups that basically break even and draw in more time and effort from people, and don't actually create wealth or the impact that they hoped. So again, the reason for this lecture is really just down to, how do we stop people from having to go through that pain? And how do we make sure that when people have these big visions, these dreams, these passions, it's going to go somewhere and you're going to get the results that you wanted. Launching a startup with no structure, with no idea of where you're going and how you're going to do it, and how you're going to pivot when you realize that your initial idea was wrong, or not fully formed, is also a great way to lose your reputation, because you will use up your funds, you'll use up your co-founders' money, and eventually your investors as well, who may be family members and friends. So really do think about this seriously before you just launch into something, and do something that will have a poor result. Do the founders matter? Especially in an early stage startup? Yes, absolutely. The founders are probably the only thing that you can measure, especially when something's just an idea, when it's just a business plan with no actual traction yet. The founders are the only thing that you can really go on. They're the first impression that investors and potential team members and future team members will get of the project. And since most sales at the beginning of a project are founder-led sales, whether someone can credibly talk about their topic, their market, and what they're doing is very important. There should always be 2 or 3 of them. Solo founders are a red flag to most professional investors, and the reason is, we are all able to fall into our own biases, into our own kind of echo chambers, where we're surrounded by people who tell us yes. And it's important for any founder to have a few peers and probably some additional advisors as well, who are going to tell them no sometimes, or that something is a bad idea, and who are going to spread that expertise and knowledge across multiple areas, because most businesses require multiple skill sets, not just one. Too many founders can also be a problem. Why is that? When it comes down to it, once a startup is launched, every minute that you waste is a minute of your cash, of your team's resilience, of your time, of your runway that is being used up. And so it's very important to move fast. And moving fast is usually a question of one person making the final decision on something. So just as it can be harmful for one person to just be making all the decisions without any input from others, it can be just as harmful to have leadership by committee or a lack of cohesion among an initial group of founders, especially when you're trying to do something for the first time. Because at the beginning of your founder origin story, if you will, everything is possible. You could do literally everything that you can write down a piece of paper. And later on, it'll be more possible to govern through committees and so on and so forth once you're just making small tweaks to an established process and making it more efficient. And even then, it's usually not the absolute best. But at the beginning, you're going to need speed and you're going to need execution, and that's going to apply to any kind of organization. It's usually important for the founders to have known each other for some time, and even better, worked together before they start a startup together. Um, the reason for that is mostly that running a startup can be painful, and you want to have a base of experience to fall back on in terms of trust and in terms of understanding how people work when things get tough. I think all of us have had moments that we were less proud of our behavior when we're under stress, whether that's because we backed away from something that we should have confronted or because we confronted something where we should have listened. And having that knowledge and that habit with people and that trust is really going to make a big difference. It's also going to make you more able to trust your co-founders or your core team or your initial team to do the things that they're good at because you already have seen them perform. And it also helps you select people who are going to round out your elements. When things get really tough, it's going to be down to whether someone puts their personal savings into something, whether someone really does quit their job to join your team, whether they're willing to put their reputation on the line to say that you can deliver something. So trust is really important. Other key elements of a founding team, and these are just things that an investor who has worked in early stage a lot will pick up on instantly. And if you don't get these right, they may end your presentation before you even start talking about your business. You need to have clear expectations of each other in terms of work and in terms of capital. Now imagine you start a business with two of your friends or even a family member, and one of those people never shows up for work. That's going to create friction, right? Because you were expecting that support, but they may also have a different expectation of how much they were going to do because they actually put in the capital to get the business started. You want all these things to be clear, whether it's the amount of time spent, whether it's the objectives that they're supposed to deliver and bring to the table, whether it's the amount of capital they're bringing to the structure, the type of work that they're going to do, the type of salary they're going to get, any additional incentives that they're going to get, especially if these are your co-founders and you're the founder with 100% shares. You want all these things to be clear to people because typically startups founders work harder than just about everyone. And so if you are ditching a 9-to-5 job that is well paid to join a startup to work twice as hard for half as much, there should be some sort of rationale in that that's going to make it worth it. And that's going to make you not resent the long hours and the hard work and the uncertainty. So it's really important to have that clear at the beginning. You have to be 100% in the business to put the title founder on. I think huge red flag for most investors if a founder is not in the business 100%. I've seen that happen actually, where one of the co-founders of a business was actually starting his own business on the side, and it really doesn't work because in the end, you're only going to focus your limited time on the thing where you believe you have the most profitability. And if one of the founders, one of these core people who is responsible for the purpose and the vision of the activity, doesn't believe that this is the only thing that they should be spending time on, then why would an investor put their money there? It's just something to have thought. Usually one of the founders at least should have experience being the target client. Again, the best ideas usually generate from personal pain and frustration. And so if one of the founders of the business has been the client, they will understand, who do I need to talk to? How does that organization work? How do they get things approved? Who has the money to pay for it? And what are the real challenges that need to be solved? One of them should have experienced delivering the product, right? It's not the same thing to say, I really wish I could eat bread and I want to make bread as a baker. A baker has additional information in terms of what kinds of ovens, what kinds of time, what different kinds of crust brushings I can use in order to create different appearances. Can I texture the bread? Can I use different types of flour? So typically you want to map out, again, one person who really knows the client really well, who's usually going to be on the sales side, one person who knows product, who might be your product person, who might be your operations person, who might also be your CTO under the right circumstances. And then one of them should have experience administering a company, preferably a startup. And again, remember that a startup is not the same thing as a regular business. A startup can spend 2 years without making a single Swiss franc or a dollar, because a startup is fundamentally a learning organization. And so you want someone administering the company and helping structure the objectives and helping move the teams along, who understands that the purpose of a startup is to understand what the right things to do are as fast as possible, not just to make money. Because you could make opportunistic money in the first period of a startup and not learn and not find your ideal client and not fully realize the value, and then find yourself after a couple of months losing those clients because they're unsatisfied. No real value has been delivered to them. And then find yourself in kind of a situation where those months and the salaries that you've paid yourselves and your team members and all the things that you've paid for within the business have been wasted because you have not moved closer to being the startup that you would need to be in order to be self-sufficient. A note on focus. I think one of the things that I talk to founders a lot is having a true understanding of focus, which is, again, you want to be in one startup at a time if you are one of the founders. And usually you want your team members focused on that. There's a caveat to that, but let's get into it afterwards. You want to be focused on one client until you reach probably about top 7 figures or even 8 figures. It is always going to be to your advantage to niche down, to focus on a particular client, a particular type of business, a particular country, rather than expanding out. And the reason for that is it speeds up your speed of acquisition. And you only want to build one product at a time. And generally, one of the things for me that already tells me that a startup is going to struggle is if they have multiple dependent products that have to all be sold together in order to work. Or they have multiple clients that need to be convinced. Here's a classic I see a lot. You want to sell a B2B solution to a company, but in order for it to be valuable to your client, it has to be valuable to their client. And so what you're basically setting yourself up for, if you have 2 clients in this situation, is that you may be the best seller in the world to selling to your first B2B client, but you don't have access to that second client. And so you're putting yourself in a situation where you have no control over the outcome. That second client may completely reject your solution, in which case your first client, no matter how much they like you, won't buy. Or they may accept it for reasons that you don't understand because you're not getting that information, that data. And then your client may pivot towards a solution provider who is better suited to that second thing. So again, one project, one client, one product. And again, you'll hear me saying it over and over. Startups are hard. And you see the picture at the bottom of the screen. It's a little bit like building the Death Star, right? There are so many things that can go wrong in a startup that if you aren't completely focused on doing the one thing and doing the one thing really well, then you're going to leave a key vulnerability that might just spell the end of your entire project. The main reason that startups fail is a lack of product market fit. And by definition, product market fit is when you reach the point where you are selling whatever it is that you're producing, which may be a product or a service, as fast as you can basically ship it off the shelves, right? So your team is spending 100% of their time just shipping the thing out. And you have the only thing that you can do in order to make more money is hire more people or create bigger pipelines. And to reach that point, you need to have perfectly met the needs of your client. If you have two clients, it's already going to be harder because they might have conflicting needs, or you may have to meet both of their needs imperfectly. So you'll never reach product market fit. The second reason startups fail is because they run out of money. Cash is absolutely important. You may find that some team members might be willing to work unpaid for a time, and that's okay as long as they're properly incentivized in the back end in terms of ownership and things like that. But you will rarely find a landlord who will rent you an office unpaid. You'll rarely find a internet service provider who will let you use their resources unpaid. You will rarely find a client who is willing to sign up for a company that they know is bankrupt. Because that's too big a risk. So by keeping the focus on one project, on one client, on one product, you reduce the amount of burn that you need, and you reduce the expertise that you need, right? If you needed to sell to two clients, you would need to have two salespeople with different skills, or you would have to find a more expensive salesperson who is capable of selling to both those things. If you're focused on one client, you can find a salesperson who already knows that one thing and probably get them cheaper. The third reason they fail is founder conflict. I can't emphasize this enough. It's down to that statement that we made in the previous slide, which is your understanding of your responsibilities and expectations as you start with a founding team needs to be crystal clear. Because as things get hard and as you have to pivot and adjust your dream to what your client actually wants, to what you're able to build, and to what the project will pay you for, having that clarity of purpose and that understanding of where you're going with other founders is going to allow you to not spend your time fighting each other, but spend your time building better stuff. And so you should be really clear on that. It's one of the things that I spend a good amount of time on when I'm working with startups or even in the businesses I've been in, is really making sure that communication and purpose and the time that needs to be spent on different things is clear. And for that, all your priorities need to be aligned. Again, one project, one client, one product. And then with so much complexity and risk, you need to do one thing well, or else you'll kill your reputation and people won't buy from you. I'm going to pause here for just 1 second. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, let's move on. We talked about, do you know who your client is? I think particularly people who have a marketing background, maybe a big business background, or who've worked in agencies and not with startups, have the potential to get this wrong. And it can also not be the marketing people. It can be a great frustration for your marketing team to try to explain to a founder that you can't just do advertising. You can't just do PR. It doesn't work. You need to have a specific person in mind, and then you need to go where they are. Trying to sell things to people and trying to make the right people aware of what it is that you do is usually the first reality check between your idea and your vision and your dream and the world that will pay you. Your product cannot be all the people who want your product. I think most people have that notion down in general as an idea, right? They try to narrow down what is my market. Okay, it's going to be professionals who work in a certain industry because I am building a piece of software for that industry. But that is not sufficient. It should not be an entire market. As a startup, since you're trying to make at least a little bit of money and a little bit of traction and start that flow of feedback so you can make your product better, you want to focus on a specific client. And it's actually one of the reasons is you want that client to tell you no. And this may seem counterintuitive, right? You've launched a startup, you put your own savings at risk, and here I am telling you want your client to tell you no. And the simple fact is that if what you were doing was easy and obvious, someone would have done it before. So there is a reason why all the other people who had this dream before you didn't succeed. And that may have been a change in technology. And if that's the case, and you're the first one to deploy that tech, good for you. I envy you the position of being that leader, maybe. But in most cases, someone will have tried what you've tried before and failed. And usually it comes down to the vision that you have may be 100% correct, but if your client doesn't understand it, if they don't see the value in it, if it's not framed to them in a way that it makes sense, they are not going to buy. And you can write this down as kind of a universal wisdom, is that confused buyers do not buy. So by choosing a specific client, a specific group of people that you can actually reach out to and talk to, and who have kind of a homogenous or same set of needs, you create the possibility that someone can tell you no. Because the worst thing that can happen is that you put a bunch of effort into something and you spend a lot of money developing it. And when you try to get feedback, the customer is so vague that you get yeses and nos and maybes. And so you don't know if you should reinvest more into this in terms of time, in terms of resources, in terms of people, or whether you should back off. The best thing that can happen is for someone to tell you no, because then you can do what's called a pivot, which is changing your product, changing your client focus, changing how you deliver your product, changing your pricing, changing any number of things that will give you another opportunity to be right. Because typically a startup is going to have to do through multiple of these pivots before they can find the thing that really magically works. And again, remember, if this thing that you're trying to do was easy, someone would have done it before. And also, if it was easy, you wouldn't feel compelled and passionate to do it yourself. There are three attributes that will generally mark someone who could be your client. Still to be validated, but they could be your client. A great client can afford your product, right? But we already talked about a good client is one that specifically needs your product, and there's no that. A great client can afford your product. So it is not useful to target someone with a product that you know they cannot afford. And you know, whether we're talking about multiple level marketing or whether we're talking just startups that don't end up selling, you really need to understand, is the value that's created by your product, or is the disposable income that your target has sufficient in order to pay for the thing that you want to do? And then the third thing is you need to be able to actually reach that client, right? So if your ideal client is a small population in a remote area in a country that doesn't allow you in, and they don't have phones and they don't have internet, it doesn't matter if they have all the resources in the world until you find a way to access them and communicate with them and learn from them, they're not your client. And the same goes if you need to reach the top executives of companies in order to sell, but you yourself can't get past entry level people. The same goes if you are trying to deal with the government and you don't have the nationality, or you need some sort of clearance or certification. So remember, no matter how much your potential client might need your product and how much they would be willing to pay for it, if you cannot access them, if you cannot make them aware and sell to them, then they are not your client and you need to try something else. And the bottom line is, if you don't have a practical, tested, and proven way to get to your client, as an investor, anyone should be very skeptical when you say that you can extract a certain amount of revenue from them. And that's the most important thing, right? Proving and having a good level of evidence that you can get paid for what you do is what will allow you to draw in investors. It will allow you to draw in great co-founders, and it will allow you to draw in great team members. because everyone is trying to predict whether you are going to succeed or fail. What does a good client definition look like? I wrote this down quickly, and it's just an example among many others that could be, but our client is a 30 to 40-year-old woman in cities like Paris, New York, Los Angeles, Milan, or Seoul. She works in a multinational professional services company like an ad agency or consulting firm. She speaks English. She just got promoted to manager or senior manager and is looking for training on negotiating to close deals or to put forward her opinion in meetings. Her main channels for education are LinkedIn and Instagram, but she only looks at them during a short lunch break. So that will tailor things. She is far more likely to respond to a recommendation from a colleague. Again, I think most people have seen at this stage when they're wanting to start a project, some sort of persona or ICP, but really pay attention to the details of this. What we can use this for is we can target ads to that age group or based on when they went to school if we don't know how old they are. We can write our copy in English, which saves us money on translations and maybe even differentiates us in places like Milan and Seoul if you have an English ad. And you can make sure that it speaks to women's issues, not classical men problematics. I would even go as far as to say that you'd be better off with a female copywriter. We can target women who added manager to their title in the last 6 months. That's something that you could do through Sales Navigator on LinkedIn and a great way to build a list of people. Again, it may turn out that your product is not a good fit for that audience. But until you target them specifically and try, you will not know. And the goal ultimately is to be able to eliminate all the ideas that won't work, or at least enough of them so that you can find that little part of the pie chart that does work and put all your attention and all your focus and all your talent in that. In the case we described on the left, we should invest in growing LinkedIn and Instagram for account growth. Typically, when you're starting out in social media and producing content, one of the mistakes you can make is to try to start on every channel right away. And that will just generally lead to overwhelm and not getting the results you want and feeling like you're spending a lot of time on something that isn't generating a return. Specific channels also have specific formats, specific tones, so it's usually better to focus on two to start with. And then the last statement, which is that they're far more likely to respond to a recommendation from a colleague, we could set up a very robust and easy streamlined referral program. If some of you remember how Gmail started, you could only get a Gmail account if you were referred by someone who already had a Gmail account, right? And so that creates a notion of exclusivity, but it also is something that's more trusted and reduces your cost of acquisition. A little cool thing as an aside, for those of you who are setting up referral programs or ambassador programs, always try to pay ambassadors and referrers in more of your own product. And there's two reasons for that. One is that you really want the people who are pushing you forward to be people who would rather get more of your product than money. That means that they're going to speak well of you. And two, when you promote your own services, your own products, you can promote them at their sale price. Whereas if you give people cash, you're doing it at the actual cost to you. So you can always, just based off profit margins and pricing, give away more value in your own product than you can give in cash for the same cost. The next thing we should talk about is hard value. So we've set the scenario, right? You've aligned your founders, you have the skills in the industry and the product that you want to work in. You found a specific client that has specific reasons why they need your product. They can afford it and you're able to target it, and you start actually making offers to these people, and they suddenly become less interested. They liked the vision, they liked the team, they liked the idea of the impact that you're trying to do, but your product isn't working for them. And usually, this is a question of value. A lot of people will think, well, if someone doesn't buy something, I should make it cheaper. And actually, that's a false thought. There's actually no such thing as a product that is too expensive. And let me explain why that's true. If my product was, I will give you $1,000, um, I can charge any number between $1 and $999, and anyone should take that deal. If I am going to give you $1,000,000, it doesn't matter if I charge you $1 or $999,000, because you're still getting more value than you take, and you're getting it instantly. So anyone would be foolish not to take that arbitrage as long as they believe that you were all actually going to deliver it. So when you're starting out, you always want to aim for the biggest value that you are able to deliver for the client that is able to pay for it. And I think most people know that they would rather receive $1,000,000 than they would receive $1,000, even if the profit off that was $1 in both cases. So don't get sucked into a trap of trying to price down, because that's usually an indication that either you aren't valuable enough in what you're delivering, or that someone else is already doing what you're doing and they're doing it cheap. So value is always referenced to a client. It's what is the value to that person? Water has a different value to you if you live by a lake or by a desert. And the old truism of selling refrigerators to Eskimos, even though actually refrigeration might be a need within certain things, but you always need to start your value discussion from the basis of a customer. And hard value is usually one of four things. It's going to be wealth. So that's the scenario where I give you more money than you pay me. Or I return something of greater value to you than money, which might be your health. I think most of us, when choosing between dying or choosing between paying a doctor, would pay a doctor, or pay for health insurance if you're fortunate enough to live in a country where you can get health insurance. And relationships. These are the three things that most people will pay for, whether that's a dating app, or whether that's a matchmaking service, or whether that's a nice dinner for your partner when you're at your anniversary, or wedding dress or wedding ceremony. Most people will pay to become more wealthy, more healthy, or have better relationships. They will also pay to do a thing that they are already doing faster, cheaper, easier, or better. And those are really the four categories, right? Wealth, health, relationships, or something that they already have to do, something they've already accepted. Someone's done the work for you, but you can do it faster, cheaper, easier, better. When you're relying on the faster, easier, cheaper, better, you generally want to make it at least 10 times better. When you're putting a pencil to paper for your initial Berlin. And part of that is because by the time you really hit your stride, things will have moved forward, and your competitors will appear around year 2 or year 3. And so you really want that head start so that you can build your brand, you can build that idea, and you can make sure that you're not going to get your idea stolen from you from the get-go. And we'll talk about a moat in a little bit. So when we talk about value, that value needs to be really clear to your client before they buy. You also need to understand that a lot of people mix up value, methods, and purpose. Blockchain or tokens or NFTs are a method. NFTs are a really good example of that. At its base, an NFT, as most people think of it, is just a JPEG or a PNG or a digital piece of art, but it is also a contract that provides the owner of that NFT with certain privileges. And then it also has kind of a more emotional component of a perception of rarity of that NFT. But all of those things could be replicated in different ways, right? You could have a handshake from the artist that they're never going to do another version of this thing. You could have a written contract signed in ink that told you that you were the owner of this digital piece and no one was going to reproduce it. So there are some aspects to blockchains. There are aspects of NFTs that make it either a better way of delivering a certain value or a worse way of delivering this value. But you shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that the method is the value in of itself, unless your audience is a group of people who particularly find hard value in that thing, right? So if you are selling to people who only purchase blockchain solutions and you do a blockchain solution that is faster, cheaper, easier, better, you have come back to hard value. If you are selling to NFT collectors and you have found a new way to do NFTs faster, cheaper, easier, better, then the NFT component is hard value. But if you're just approaching art collectors, if you're just approaching CIOs or CTOs, that is not going to be a winning argument for you. And it's probably going to distract and eventually shut down your sales process. And another thing that we see a lot in the blockchain and Web3 space in sales is this idea that decentralization or personal ownership of data or the removal of middlemen is an inherent good and that people will pay for that. And that's actually not true. Typically, people will pay to remove middlemen because it creates more wealth for the remaining pipeline or the value chain. People want decentralization because they believe that the centralized authorities making choices for them are damaging their health of their relationships. People will go for other types of solutions because they have that hard value impact. But again, unless you're dealing with people who have already abstracted and generalized that rule of hard value to something that is more akin to the purpose of your organization, just remember that that is not why people are buying from you. It might be why they're buying from you rather than a competitor if you're delivering equal or at least equivalent value while maintaining this principle, but it is not the main thing that you should put forward. What's special about your idea? And remember what I said at the beginning, which is that if you are starting a startup that does the same thing as someone else, you're destroying value. And I think that can be a little bit contentious for some people. And I'll go back to the idea of an auto repair shop. Imagine you're starting an auto repair shop, and there's already an auto repair shop in your town. That means that you are going to let's say that you double the amount of cars that are being repaired in your town using these two businesses. In principle, that's good, right? So you've doubled the amount of revenue. But you're also having to hire your own accountant. You're having to do your own tax filing. You're having to set up your own business. You're having to rent your own space to do it in instead of just expanding or buying out the rest of it. You are spending marketing dollars in order to take away some clients from that other mechanic. You're fighting over mechanics to work in your shop, which means that you're driving the salary payroll prices up. Um, all of these things might benefit the ecosystem as a whole, but they're actually bad for you as a business owner, right? Because instead of twice the revenue coming into a single business, you are cannibalizing some of that value on things that don't really matter, right? The purpose of an auto shop is not to do accounting. The purpose of an auto shop is to repair cars. So when you start something that is too similar to another business, you are destroying value for both those businesses. You would be far better off if you can approaching the founder of that existing auto shop and saying, hey, what would you think about doubling the size of your operation? I am willing to provide the capital if you are willing to share some of the value with me. Um, and that's also how usually an analysis of a purchase will go. When it comes down to strategy, differentiation comes from what you choose not to do. So let's say that you are starting that second mechanic shop, but you are not going to hire mechanics. you are going to use a decentralized system to Uberize mechanic work, where customers and mechanics are matched on the fly. And so your costs go down. Maybe the mechanics make a bigger margin, and maybe you gain a competitive advantage against that other traditional mechanic who is now forced to lower their price, whereas you keep your prices where you are because you were more competitive. And maybe you serve people faster. You are choosing not to do to have permanent staff. You're choosing not to have them on payroll. You're choosing not to have people who recurrently work for you. You're probably going to have to be more flexible on how people work because you're dealing with more self-contractors. But you're gaining in capital usage, you're gaining in speed and scalability. And so that is true differentiation. Typically, though, your differentiation should start with the client, right? That first scenario was really thinking of how do we take something that already exists and make it better, hopefully 10 times better. But you could do a better differentiation by really focusing on client. So if there's already an auto shop in a town, then why not say they have the middle range income cornered. I am only going to deal with sports cars and exotic vehicles from abroad for ultra high net worth individuals. And now you aren't cannibalizing each other's business. You are going to focus on sports cars, and you are going to have to work on having an inventory of very expensive parts or being able to get them shipped faster. You're going to be able to focus your sales on a group of people who are not being targeted by that kind of mainstream auto parts shop. You can hold events where you only invite these high net worth individuals so that you're reducing the cost of your drinks and food. All those things are possible, and you can become more special, more differentiated, and better at what you do because you chose to serve one thing, and more importantly, you chose not to go after everyone. And remember, at the beginning of your business, it is almost always going to be to your advantage to go after a more focused group of clients, a more focused product, than it is going to be to go after a wider group. Go into the details, right? Once you've set up that new business, find the really little ways that are going to make things better, right? If you spend most of your time dealing with Ferrari owners, have little Ferrari glassware. Have mechanics or maybe a driver who can drive a sports car without damaging it and deliver it or pick it up from a client's home. Figure out how you're going to interact with them. Are you going to have a really nice waiting area that's going to be able to cater to that type of person? Are you going to have multiple mechanics work on the car at the same time in order to get it back to them faster, and they're happy to pay a higher price for that? Are you going to give them a little explanatory video of all the stuff that you're going to do? What kind of support? Are they able to call you from 9 to 5, or can they call you in the middle of the night when they're stuck at a club? And you're going to give them a replacement vehicle that is similar to the one they're already driving and come with kind of a tow that's able to take that sports car on without scratching it up. There's all kinds of ways where the more you focus on that client and that business case, the harder it's going to be for that other auto shop to compete with you. And especially if at the same time you have kind of created this specialized network of mechanics who can work on this kind of car and who are working with you through a blockchain or a distributed scenario, you will find yourself in a market of one, and it will be much easier to make money. You should always push to find new ways to make the customer experience easier, faster, bigger. I think if you were running that business, it would be really important every once in a while to sit down with your mechanics and say, okay, our average repair time is 3 days. How can we get that down to 2 days? How can we get it down to 1 day? What's a way we could, not even have to have a mechanic shop? We could do all repairs on site. There's always going to be a way to get better. But just realize that when it comes down to even a website experience, anything more than 6 seconds and you're losing customers. So seconds really do matter. And don't shy away from something because it's urgent, difficult, risky, or unpleasant. Typically, people, when they have simple problems, they will just solve it themselves, even if it's not the rational decision to do that. I remember once we got pitched when I was working in coffee by a solution provider that was going to save us tens of thousands of dollars a year by automating a simple process, but the process was too simple. And so the my boss at the time's reaction was, "This is too simple to pay for. We'll do it ourselves." Now, the reality is we didn't do it ourselves, and so we didn't make that saving that we would have made simply by paying for the service. But if someone is going to buy from you, they need to have the perception that they would not be able to do it themselves as well as you could, even if they're not doing it already. And then again, I've said this a couple times, but it's always important for emphasis. When you start out with an idea of how you're going to do something special for a particular client or a particular niche, don't get tricked when you don't make money in the first months into going into a wider market just because it's more understandable and easier. Because there's a reason it's a wider market. People are already serving those things, and again, you're just destroying value by doing that and destroying your own business case. It's better to try to figure out why is my individual little niche not working, because if you can make it work, that is where real value creation will happen. When should you talk about tokens? I think one of the things that I have told every single Web3 startup that I have coached through a demo day or investor pitching is I've asked them to pitch me their project without talking about the token at all, or without talking about the NFT or the blockchain. And that's obviously very hard if you're on the infrastructure side, but most people aren't. If you're user facing in any way, you should be able to talk about your product without the tech. And it goes back to what we said about hard value. Most people do not view using a particular technology as an inherent good. They want to do things faster, better, cheaper, and easier. They want to accumulate more wealth. They want to be healthier. They want to have better relationships. And so if your project is good enough to deliver on that hard value, you should be able to talk about it without the tech. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't talk about the tech at all. Uh, Once you have reached a point where your value proposition is hard enough, crunchy enough, understandable enough that you can talk about it without the tech, the next level game that will really get you the top tier of investors and the best people is to say, because we have the tech, we are going to deliver outsized results. We're going to do it better than any of the competition. We are going to be able to truly deliver something that is disruptive and unique. But the thing that you're delivering, typically, again, unless you're dealing with someone who needs a solution to a backend problem, the tech is not important. And in fact, a lot of times the people with the authority to buy are not the people who have technical proficiency. So if you cannot pitch to them without an understanding of detailed hardware or software or other process steps, it's probably not going to work. If your audience wants to know about the tech, the first thing that you should address, even to the most hardcore CTO, is why the tech is important. And you'll see this from people who really work in the digital transformation or digital industry in general, is that's the first thing they want to know, because that's the question their CEOs and COOs are going to ask them, right? Why should I disrupt my business processes to install this new widget that you want me to install? That is a fight that most CTOs and CIOs have constantly. And the simple fact is that most businesses and most people have hundreds of problems that they need solved. But they're only going to have the capacity and the budget to solve a few of them. And so if you aren't solving something that's more critical than just, oh, let's put it on a blockchain, um, your idea is going to struggle. And again, it's not necessarily wrong if you can make it work, but typically it's going to increase the amount of pain you need to go through in order to get there. If you have one or more tokens involved in the solution and you're facing an audience who understands tokenomics, who has dealt with many Web3 projects, I would suggest having a section of your presentation that really goes into the nitty-gritty on that. But play it by ear. If you see the audience disconnecting, offer to do that as a separate presentation or shift it as an annex to the end of the slides. If you're only using the token to raise funds, put it at the end of the presentation during the ask. And I say this even when you're presenting to a very technical audience, because one of the main ways to turn off a Web3 entrepreneur, a Web3 angel investor or VC is to kind of throw useless applications of technology at the wall. It's usually a good sign you don't know what you're talking about, or you're trying to capitalize on hype. Again, your goal should be to deliver hard value and to deliver more of it faster, easier, and better because you're using a particular application of technology. And it's even better if that technology is truly new, truly innovative, and you own it. Be wary of if you're going to put forward a higher valuation because you have tech, be really careful of how you integrate open source programs in there and off-the-shelf solutions. When we get into intellectual property, it can be very powerful for your valuation and for the willingness of people to invest in you to have some sort of proprietary software or hardware solution. But it usually comes with costs. So you'll want to talk to a specialized IP lawyer right off the bat if it's core to your project. One, in order to keep it safe. But that should be a secondary factor. I think most entrepreneurs will tell you, unless you're in pharma or really in kind of a high-tech R&D function, the time that you spend defending your idea is not worth the loss of time that you would spend selling it and making it profitable. But there are cheap ways to protect your IP and make it harder for people to copy it that you could go right off the bat, and you should definitely do those things. All of this contributes to building a moat. And this is one of the things that you should be aware of. There are lots of good ideas out there that can make you a quick dollar, that are a good side hustle. But if someone can immediately replicate it, that just means that the more money you make, the more likely you are to lose your business. And again, just because you learned in this lesson that creating a business that's exactly the same as one that already exists is a destruction of value and a loss of your time, just because you understand that doesn't mean someone else won't do it. There are plenty of people who will reduce the value of an ecosystem to zero, trying to grab a quick buck. And so just be aware that the greater the barrier you can put, because you're solving hard problems, because you have the best people in your field and other people are not be able to reproduce their results because you've protected yourself from an IP standpoint. And so you have the right kind of patents or the right kind of trademarks or IP protection. Because you don't share the details of your ideas with people you don't trust too early in the process, and they're able to catch up. And this last one may surprise you. One of the ways to build a moat is by charging more for what you sell. Now let's think about that for a second, because at the beginning I said that the more you charge, the more likely someone will try to copy you. But just remember, if you charge very little for what you do and you make very little profit, that means that you cannot invest that profit into making your product better. And so what it boils down to is by charging a higher price for something up front, you are able to invest more into making sure that you will be able to sell that again and sell it better, faster, easier, cheaper to more clients. And so typically speaking, anyone who can find a way to get even 1% ahead of the rest of the competition in terms of the quality and the usability of their product, that gap will continue to widen. And you will typically see very small differences in quality between a market leader in terms of the cost and the actual features of their product, but you'll see a much bigger difference in terms of market share and price. So charge what your idea is worth will actually help increase the perception of value and increase the difficulty of other people trying to copy your idea. But bottom line, you do have to build it, right? I think I said at the beginning of this, all the things that we talked about during this lecture can be invalidated by you actually doing the thing. And I do caution you, just charging ahead will cause you lots of pain. It will cause other people pain. Oftentimes, you will be one of the 50% of people who will fail out in 5 years, but it can be done. And so what I would say is the real aspect of a managing partner or CEO of a good startup, a really good entrepreneur, is recognizing that point where you have enough information, right? You never have all the information because your story as a startup will be about learning more about your clients, about your product, about what sells and what doesn't. But there is a point at which you have enough information and yet your competition isn't really starting yet. And then from that point, you need to move fast. And the best way to really test your ideas and find out if something is really true is not necessarily by doing endless research and by putting out polls. It's by trying to sell your product. Because a client can tell you that they want something all day long, but until they're willing to pay for it and pay a good price for it, right? So you can reinvest and continue to make things better. You can waste a lot of time building things off people's say so that they will not actually pay you the value of later on. Just remember that when you're in a startup, the difference between a startup and an enterprise is usually that a startup doesn't know or hasn't yet made money from what it does. And so since you are in that state of uncertainty, and since most startups fail, you are probably going to start out with a wrong assumption to begin with. And your ability to prove that you are wrong to yourself so that you are able to be right in the future faster than anyone else is really what matters. And the day that you have it right and everything is just going as fast as it can, you probably aren't a startup anymore. So just keep that in mind. It's not about having the perfect vision from day one. It's not about having all the information from day one. It's about going out there, testing, proving yourself wrong so that you can be right before anyone else. And then that's when you get to enjoy the fruit of all the work and the effort and the sacrifices that you made up to that point. My name is DJ Bodden, and I presented on behalf of Storm Partners and the Cardano ecosystem through the Catalyst Fund. If you have further questions about this, please do reach out. It's my personal passion to dig into startup strategy and help founders find a way to do what they do better. We at Storm Partners in general are what we call ecosystem accelerators. We work with ecosystems like the Cardano ecosystem to help them grow by helping projects do better, by helping entrepreneurs find their way, by helping the right people find that ecosystem and join them, and by streamlining those processes. You can see that we've put some proposals forward for Fund 11 and Fund 12, and we'll continue working in the ecosystem and trying to find ways to add value because we too are going through that startup journey of getting to know our client and finding more ways to engage with them. Please do give us feedback. It's really important to us to continue to make this better. I think in general, there's the base requirements of doing this proposal, and then there's the other thing, which is really creating enterprise value for the ecosystem and finding ways to help startups and help founders do better in everything they do. Thanks so much for watching, whether you're watching it live or you're watching it after, and do feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or comments. I'll leave that up for just a moment. And any questions from anyone in the call if need be? Okay, great. You can find us on Twitter, you can find us on LinkedIn, you can find us at the address on the screen. Thanks so much for watching and have a fantastic day. I hope you go out there and build something amazing.